Hey, Dan Beagleman here. This video is on the Phrygian Mode. This is the third in a series of 7 videos on the modes based on the major diatonic scale. In this video I'll talk about the chemistry of the Phrygian Mode, what makes it sound the way it does, which chords to apply it to, and key of course. We'll talk about applications for soloing, improvising, composing ideas, and also connecting this mode to pentatonic and blues scales to get the most out of your playing. So, on to the Phrygian Mode. What makes the Phrygian Mode sound the way it does? Why does it sound different than other scales and other modes? Every mode or scale has a chemistry or a formula to it. It's a sequencing of steps. A whole step is equivalent to 2 frets. A half step is equivalent to 1 fret. So the sequence or the pattern for a Phrygian Mode is half, whole, 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 half, whole, whole. And what does that mean? I'll demonstrate an E Phrygian Mode on the low E string. E. There you go. There's your root note. My next note is a half step higher, which is 1 fret. Then a whole step higher, which is 2 frets. And then following that sequence, half, whole, 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 half, whole, whole. Okay? It means I just, after the first note, I played a half step higher or 1 fret, then 2 frets, 2 frets, 2 frets, 1 fret, 2, and followed that sequence. Because of that, from starting for that first note and following that sequence, I get the sound of the Phrygian Mode. Every scale, every mode has just a different arrangement of half steps, whole steps, and sometimes even 1.5 steps. Now, in that Phrygian Mode pattern that I just played, there's some interesting things to see in there. Here's the pattern again. What do we see here? There's no sharps and no flats. All natural notes. E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E. What key or scale has no sharps or no flats? C. The key of C, the C major scale, which is also the C Ionian mode, has all natural notes. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So an E Phrygian mode has the same notes as a C major scale or an E Ionian mode. Okay? If you take this a little further, if you look at this from this perspective, if I'm thinking E and I want to use the Phrygian mode, I know the Phrygian Mode now is a C major scale. Okay? Here's a C major scale. Okay? Now, the E Phrygian Mode, the difference between that and the C Ionian Mode is what is the key center, the root note that I want to focus on. Because if I play an Ionian Mode, if I use C as my key center, the pattern is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. If I start on the E note, the third note in the C major scale, my pattern changes to half, whole, 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 half, whole, half, whole, whole. That's why this scale sounds different, even though I'm using the same notes. So here's a C major scale playing from C to C. Okay? Here's the same scale, but I'm just going to start in the 3rd degree, E, and just go E to E and return all natural notes. And there's an E chord, an E5 chord, E major chord, if you will. You can hear the difference. It's striking. C chord, C major scale. E5 chord, E Phrygian Mode. Okay? Big difference between the two. So, you can think of a Phrygian Mode as playing a major scale 2 whole steps under your key. The reason I like to use it or think that way, and I use this with a lot of students that I have, is you can memorize a whole different fingering patterns for many scales, but if you just know a basic major scale pattern, you can just apply the principle to think, okay, well, if I want to use a Phrygian Mode, play a whole step under, 2 whole steps under. If you watched the previous video on the Dorian Mode, the same principle applies. It's 1 whole step under. So if I'm in the key of E and I want to play a Dorian Mode, it's a whole step under. I'll just play a D scale. If I want to play Phrygian mode from E, I'll just play C scale, 2 whole steps under. It's an interesting way to look at these modes, or quick way to access them. But again, the key thing to pay attention to is, if you're thinking that it's a C major scale, which it is, don't focus on C as the key center of the scale. Focus on E, which is the third tone or the third degree of the scale. E Phrygian is a C major scale, but the third degree of the scale, which is E, is your nucleus of the scale, or center point, or whatever. Sometimes I like to use the analogy of the sun and the planets. The sun is the key center, so in this case it's E, and the planets revolve around the sun. The notes in the C scale will revolve around this E note as the key center, as opposed to the C as the key center. Makes sense, right? Here I'll demonstrate that idea again of the Phrygian mode. I'll use the 5th string A in this case, okay? So same idea, open 5th string A, and following that pattern, half whole, 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 half whole, whole. That's an A Phrygian mode on note 1 string. If I look at the notes I just played, I have all natural notes except B is now B flat because of that half step from A. So an A Phrygian mode has a B flat in it. What scale or key has a B flat? The answer is the key of F. The key of F, or an F scale, has a B flat. If I use A as my key center, and now with that formula, as I mentioned before, or the way to look at it, 2 whole steps under to get a Phrygian mode. From A, 2 whole steps under is F. So A Phrygian is an F scale. Just focus on the third degree of the F scale. Focus on the third degree of the F scale as the A note. There you go. Okay, here's an F major scale in position 5. Okay, sounds like an F chord. Now if I play the same pattern with the B flat, I'll just start and end on A. Sounds like a whole different thing. A Phrygian is F major. Just focus on the third degree of the F scale, which is A. Now, talking about the A Phrygian mode again, or any Phrygian mode for that matter, there's another way you can view Phrygian modes by relating them to the natural minor scale, because the Phrygian mode is a minor sounding mode. You're going to use that for minor keys, minor chords. Here's an A natural minor scale. All natural notes, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. Okay, that's A natural minor. Now, if I played the A Phrygian mode, remember I have to have a B flat. So the difference is the Phrygian mode is a natural minor scale with a flat second degree. A natural minor has A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, and A Phrygian is A, B flat, C, D, E, F, G, A, and back. And this difference when you go from A to B flat as opposed to B for the second note is that half step. That really gives the characteristic sound of the Phrygian mode. It makes it sound the way it does. So that B flat, that half step, again, that really jumps out at you and it says, it screams, hey, I'm in the Phrygian mode, I'm the Phrygian mode. Okay? Very cool stuff, right? There are many positions for playing scales and modes across the fingerboard, of course, but here's a, I'd like to say, user-friendly one, and one that, is pretty much a go-to, I imagine, for a lot of guitar players who know this stuff. Here's a Phrygian mode in the 12th position using the key of E as an example, and of course the lowest note, first finger, fret 12, is your key center, your E note. Okay, E Phrygian mode, position 12. Has 3 key centers, 3 root notes, E, E. Okay, so again, remember it's a C scale, just starting on E. Here's a C scale in position 12. Doesn't sound like a Phrygian mode, but now okay, now it sounds like a Phrygian mode. So again, it highlights that stark difference between the two. And that half step makes a big difference going up, from the first degree to the second degree. So again, a very, very user-friendly pattern for the Phrygian mode. And of course, any way you want to start, first finger, sixth string. You want to play G Phrygian, here's G, A Phrygian, B flat Phrygian, whatever the case may be. The Phrygian mode is considered a minor mode. And why is that? Remember, there are three families of chords. There are major type chords, minor type chords, and dominant type chords. The basic chord, the basic three-part chord, the triad, will determine whether a chord or scale is major or minor. You take the first, third, and fifth degree of the scale, and that will give you the answer. If I take the first, third, and fifth note of this E Phrygian mode, I have E is the root or 1, the third note is G, the fifth note is B. So E, G, and B gives me an E minor chord. And because of that, it's quite obvious this will work for minor chords and minor keys. Now, of the 7 modes, there are 4 minor sounding modes, 2 major sounding modes, and 1 dominant sounding mode. Because there are 4 minor modes, the previous video that I did on the Dorian mode is a minor mode, and then there's this one, Phrygian, and Aeolian, which is the same as the natural minor scale, and the Locrian mode. So there are 4 minor modes that come out of the diatonic scale. Which one should you use? That depends on what you're playing. The Dorian mode, again, the video that I did before this, in my opinion, is much better suited for rock and jazz rock, some jazz in minor keys. But let's say for guitar players, what do you want to sound like? The Dorian mode is pretty much, you want to sound like Carlos Santana, play the Dorian mode. You want to sound like Duane Allman and Dickie Betts from the Allman Brothers Band on those extended jams like Whipping Post and Elizabeth Reed, use the Dorian mode mixed with the minor pentatonic scale and the minor blues scale because they're minor modes. Okay? The Phrygian mode, which we're talking about here, in my opinion, is better suited for like jazz rock, fusion, neoclassical type stuff. They use that phrase. Heavy shredding type guitar players like to use this. Great guitar players like Al DiMeola, John McLaughlin, Yngwie Malmsteen. This Phrygian mode is definitely in their toolbox. And again, mixing this up with the correct pentatonic and blues scales, I'll get to that in a little bit in this video, will give you a tremendous amount of material to work with. So again, Phrygian mode is a minor mode, and it's going to work great for shredding, jazz rock fusion, this neoclassical type stuff. Anything in a minor key and very, very heavy music it works great for. The modes are often used for soloing and improvising, but they can also be used for composing music, composing head riffs to songs, recognizable signature guitar lines. Here's a perfect example in a jazz rock fusion setting. If you're familiar with guitarist John McLaughlin, who had a group called the Mahavishnu Orchestra in the 70s, real jazz rock, heavy, wild music. Their debut album, The Intermounting Flame, the opening track was a song called Meeting of the Spirits. And that song is in the key of F sharp, and the signature line that the bass is playing, the violin is doubling it, is built on the Phrygian mode. Okay, song is in the key of F sharp. Here's an F sharp Phrygian mode. 3 keynotes in this scale. The first note on the 6th string, the lowest note, F sharp, F sharp, F sharp, and it starts on the middle root note. Again, the song is in F sharp. The timing is 6/4, and the Riff is built on the Phrygian mode in a pattern descending in groups of 3. Very, very cool. Watch. Root note, and then I'm going to go 3 notes down in the Phrygian mode. Then starting the next note, which is G, 3 notes down, A note, and return. And that sits very nicely over this half-step change, like F sharp to G. So when you have that F, a chord and then a half step up and back, very, very heavy, very dark sounding, your Phrygian mode is like a perfect thing to play over that. Again, if you're not familiar with John McLaughlin and the Mahavishnu Orchestra, definitely worth checking it out. Some great, great music, some great, great musicians. There's another pattern for the Phrygian mode that I really like to use a lot and find it very, very useful. I'll show you how this works. Remember the first pattern that I showed you earlier, using E as a key center, starting at fret 12. Okay, that's in position 12, covers frets 12 through 15. This pattern is in position, for the same key for E, is in position 14, covering frets 14 through 17, but also will use the 13th fret on string 6 and string 1. So on 6 and 1, I'm going to stretch my first finger back to the left 1 fret. So it's going to encompass a 5 fret span. And here's the E Phrygian mode in the 14th position, but starting on the 13th fret. And in this case, the first note, or the lowest note, is F, which is the second degree of that scale. But here's the cool thing. If I just use that first E note, like from the first pattern, and then just shift up a half step and play this new pattern and then return back to that, I have this. And what I like about that is because I get that half step shift. So connecting these two patterns together, very, very cool thing. And of course, by the second pattern will give you one higher note there, so it extends the range a little bit of the scale as well. I'm sure there are plenty of Jeff Beck fans out there, myself included. I had the pleasure of meeting Jeff some years ago at a concert at Jones Beach Theater in Long Island, New York. At the time I was doing guitar transcriptions for Alfred Music Publishing Company, and one of the projects I had worked on was Jeff's album, Who Else? So he was on tour supporting that album, on tour with a second guitarist, Jennifer Batten, in place of the keyboard player. She was using a guitar synthesizer kind of a setup, so it replaced the keyboards. It was a great concert, no doubt. I also had happened to have gotten the book just a few days prior to the show, the transcription book that I did for that album, so I was able to bring the book with me, and that was great because I got backstage and got to meet Jeff, and I showed him the book. And I'll paraphrase, he said something like, when he was thumbing through it, like, holy shit, that's some serious stuff you're doing there. Meaning like, wow, to write out the music on this album and, to be able to put it down on paper, some mad skills you got, something like that. Anyway, very humbling to meet Jeff, and just seemed like a very, very down-to-earth guy, and he will definitely be missed for a long time for many of us. He was taken way too soon. The reason that I bring up Jeff Beck is to show you another example of using the Phrygian mode in a compositional context. Anybody familiar with Jeff's music, his first instrumental album, Blow by Blow, which came out in 1975, I believe. One of the tunes on there is called Scatterbrain. Scatterbrain is in the key of B flat minor, and it's in 9/8 time. The main riff is in 9/8 time. The chord sequence, when the solos come up, it goes to 4/4, and then there's this chord dissension at the end of each phrase or each section, which I guess is in 3/4 time. Anyway, back to Scatterbrain. The main riff being, like I said, the Phrygian mode. When I showed you earlier the two Phrygian mode patterns, one starting on E and then one moving up a half step. The reason that works nicely together, and I'll show you how this relates to scatterbrain now. Again, scatterbrain, B flat minor, okay? So if I play a B flat Phrygian here, but now if I play it the second pattern where I shift up a half step, okay? Scatterbrain starts on the 5th tone of the Phrygian mode. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is F. F is the 5th of B flat. Okay, taking into account that second pattern, I'm here. So my first finger is on this F note, and against this B flat minor chord, here's the main riff in 9/8 time. Okay, chord. Next chord, and I might as well stay with this tune. The second chord in the tune is looks like an A augmented with a B bass. Same riff, nothing changes. Then the third chord is D with a C bass, and then he takes up that same line going up a half step. Then it goes E with a D bass, then takes that line up a whole step, and the last chord is G with G major 7. And here the fingering changes a little bit to something like, looks like a Lydian line. And my next video is on Lydian mode. So that's the chord sequence. It's a 5-chord sequence: B flat minor 7, then A augmented with a B bass, D over C, E over D, G major 7. But all the first 4 lines, like I showed you, are based off the Phrygian mode, starting on the 5th of the mode, or the 5th of the scale. And then just at the end of each cycle, you have this, which is B flat with an A flat bass, and then it descends down in minor thirds, or go down 3 frets. And when the solos come up, which switches to 4/4 time, they stay with that same chord sequence, that same 5-chord sequence. So again, you can see that the Phrygian mode is being put to use here to compose the head riff to scatterbrain. Cool stuff, right? You can always mix the modes with the correct pentatonic and or blues scale to get more out of your playing. Remember, there's 3 types of modes, in a sense, characteristics, if you will. There are minor type modes, major type modes, and a dominant type mode, based on the diatonic scale. Because the Phrygian mode is a minor sounding mode, it obviously will mix with a minor pentatonic and or a minor blues scale. Staying with the key of B flat, like I was just playing scatterbrain, here's a B flat Phrygian mode. Here's a B flat minor pentatonic scale. Here's a B flat minor blues scale. Now it's obvious that there are a lot of common notes between these 3 scales. But what happens is, the difference is, the pentatonic and the blues scales will give you more like a rock blues type sound. But when you mix in especially that second note in the Phrygian mode, when you bring that half step in there, that's really changes the whole thing up. It really, really changes the whole characteristic sound. So big change just by adding that flat second in there. So the takeaway from all of this is, whatever key you're in, if you're in a minor sounding key, if you're in a minor key, playing against a minor chord, and you want more of like a jazz rock fusion type thing to go with, to solo with, you want to use the Phrygian mode and mix the Phrygian mode with a minor pentatonic and or a minor blues scale. And now I'll play a little bit to demonstrate mixing up the Phrygian mode with minor pentatonic and minor blues scales. I'll use the key of G to demonstrate. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave any questions or comments in the comments section below. I'm Dan Beagleman, and that's the Phrygian mode. Have a nice day.